Welcome to Smart Energy, a podcast where we talk about electrification, home improvement, and clean energy. I'm your host, Andrew Zoellner, editor-in-chief at OhmConnect. This week, I'm joined by Kelsey Bourgeois, senior editor at OhmConnect. OhmConnect is on a mission to rally people to change how and when they use electricity, unlocking clean, affordable, and reliable energy. You can learn more and get paid to conserve energy at ohmconnect.com. Thanks for joining me, Kelsey. How's it going?
Thanks for having me. It's going well. You know, my dog's recovering from surgery, so I've got him with me here, but otherwise everything's good.
So, Kelsey, it's fall, and in
Yes.
our area of the country, that means people are starting to think about winter and heating their homes, especially. Earlier this month, there was a major announcement around heat pumps. So there's a consortium of governors and states and territories called the U.S. Climate Alliance. And they have a very aggressive goal of installing 20 million residential heat pumps by 2030.
Yes, I saw this. It's so cool.
And I think the like one of the best things about this is that it's not just for folks who can afford to make these upgrades to their homes, but there's a focus on making this affordable for everyone.
I love that because that really does tend to be the thing, right? Wealthier folks are like, sure, I'll do the upgrades, it's fine. And then folks who don't have that financial resource get left behind. So this is so cool.
Kelsey, I'm curious, how is your home heated?
We have radiator heat, so the water flows through the pipes, and I will tell you, I love it. I love it. It's so nice. I love the sound. I love the way it feels. I'm not a huge fan of forced air, so I'm a big fan of my heating. And also in Chicago, there are tenant laws. I'm a renter. There are tenant laws where, depending on how your building is set up and how the wiring is, your landlord cannot charge you for that utility, which is really strange. So it's just built into the price of your rent, which means I don't have a great idea of what I'm costing my landlord unless, she raises the rent the next year. So it's kind of, it's good in that it's baked in, and it's bad in that I don't have a great idea of my energy consumption on that way. So that's what's going on here. What about you? What is your heat situation?
So we have a gas gravity furnace,
Okay.
which, you mentioned you don't like forced air.
Yeah.
So like this is a furnace, and, we're burning fossil gas to heat our home.
Yeah.
But there's not a blower or a fan. So this is an old technology. The furnace is probably, from sometime in the 1930s.
Yes.
But essentially it just relies on convection and the idea that hot moves from hot to cold. And so like, it's like a very like still heat. It's not like a blowing heat at you.
I mean, that sounds great. And the fact that it lasts, I mean, it's not, the fossil fuel part's not great, but the part that it doesn't blow air on you and that it's lasted since the 30s. Oh my goodness.
So like that part is great. But I'm looking at doing some upgrades, and as part of that, I did some like heat loss calculations and like how much heat or like how much energy it should take to heat my house.
Oh no, what did you find?
So it turns out our furnace right now is about 30% efficient.
Oh no.
So that means, 30% of what I'm paying each month for my gas bill is being used to heat my house. And 70% of that is just like
flying
going
out
up
the
chimney. Yeah.
Oh no, that's so bad.
It's terrible. Also, the gravity furnace is like a huge thing. I don't have a giant house, or like the footprint of our house is like 700 square feet. And so the furnace in the basement, which also where I am right now, takes up, I would say, like maybe a quarter of the basement.
Oh my gosh, it's like massive.
It's huge. It's not efficient.
Right.
It's, essentially costing me a lot of money.
Right.
And as soon as something starts to cost folks money, like you think about replacing it. Like that's the thing that really drives change.
Yes. So are you going to do a heat pump? Is it time?
Yes. So I also love radiators. I think it's like such a great way to heat, especially an old house where you need a lot of heat. The fact that it's quiet, it's like, there's not air blowing on you. It tends to be more efficient because heat moves through objects better than it does through the air typically.
Right.
So I'm working on a project doing radiant in-floor heat. So I'm currently retrofitting our second floor to have water flowing through a tube under our floors on the second floor.
Wait, this is
And then
so
the first floor.
cool. I'm so jealous of you, and I'm so jealous of your cat. Your cat is just gonna like lounge on the ground and be so happy.
He is going to be so happy. Although I'm a little worried because like right now during cold weather, he like lives by the grate for our gravity furnace and like
Right.
moves to other parts of the house to cool down.
Uh-huh.
But like he loves the heat, and so like really I'm doing these like heated floors for
your cat.
my cat.
Hey, we love our animals here. It's fine.
Yeah. But one of the interesting things I found in the course of doing this project is that for heated floors, so like a typical like old-fashioned radiator, the water you want flowing through that radiator is like 150, 160 degrees, which is like very hot.
Yeah.
And you use a boiler to get water to that temperature.
Right.
But when you're doing stuff in floors, you can't like cook your wood floor or whatever,
yeah, right.
Tile,
that's gonna
whatever.
Be bad. Yeah.
So you want that water flowing through that tube at like 80 to 100 degrees usually.
So way more efficient is what it sounds like.
So
right?
like it doesn't have to be as hot, and also so heat pumps. That is sort of like the sweet spot for heating water is that like 80 to 120 degree range. And so that's currently the plan. I'm not going to take out my gas furnace until I know I can like keep my house at the right temperature. I've also been making improvements to the insulation and air sealing.
Yes.
And so like ostensibly it should take less energy to heat my house the more insulated and air sealed it becomes.
Right.
But it's always a little bit of a scary thing. Like it gets very, very cold in Minneapolis, and like really cold weather is not great for your house. You've got like pipes that could freeze and cause major damage, and so it's like it's a little scary to think about switching from like, oh, I just burned this gas and it produces heat and like I'm fine,
right?
I survive, versus like this relatively unknown, like new technology to me. It's been around, since like an air conditioner is a heat pump. Heat, you just like flip it around, right?
I hear you though. I'm in the Midwest too, and it's spooky because our winters do get really bad. I mean, there's in the recent years we've had cold snaps that are even in Chicago, which is a little further south than you guys. We're having times where it's -15, -20, and being without heat is a real scary thing. What I'll say though, and I'm sure that you know this, but Maine, which is freezing cold, I think, horribly cold. There's some of that state is adopting heat pumps at a massive rate. They're like leading. They've put all this money into it, and I just feel like if Maine is that confident in their ability to do that, that tells me that the technology is there, right? That we are to a point where we can start really making this transition, even in really cold places, in a real way, right?
And also like heat pumps are getting better all the time. Like when they first came out and were commercially available in the United States, like they would be able to generate heat down to like 20 degrees Fahrenheit outside.
Sure. We're like, what do you mean that you mean like April?
Yeah. But now, it's very common for them to be like very efficient down to like 0 degrees Fahrenheit or -10 or -20 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right.
And that's just going to get better.
Right.
And which is why like I'm really excited about this 20 million heat pumps by 2030.
Yes. Have you read much more about it? What are they doing to reach communities that might not normally have that access?
So a lot of it is sort of around grants.
Sure.
And also like there are a lot of like rebates and incentives available through the Inflation Reduction Act.
Right.
But like, that takes time. It takes like paperwork. It takes navigating the tax system.
It's complicated.
And they also don't pay for the entire thing. They pay for a percentage of it. And so a lot of the work is being done to secure funds for grants for low income folks. So like their out of pocket cost is negligible.
That's so huge. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm in a neighborhood that's really quite low income, and I know a lot of that would be like probably door to door outreach, just explaining to people, because just the education of, if you're not paying close attention, you may not even realize how big of a deal this is or what a difference it could make for your bills and for your carbon footprint. So that makes me happy to hear that they're really putting some effort into making sure that's expanded equitably.
The other thing I think about is like right now, it's like the time in human history when the like IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, is like a once in a lifetime bill. It's like not
Yes.
just the largest climate like funding bill we've passed in the United States. It's the largest climate funding bill that's ever been passed in the entire world.
Right.
And I think folks don't really understand the urgency of it, that like had we started this transition and started funding this earlier, we would have had more time and it could have been more gradual. But it's really like we need to get as many folks as we can off of using fossil fuels to heat their homes
as quickly
like
as possible.
As quickly as possible, because
right.
we're running out of time.
I know, and it's hard because I hate to be so dire about it, but the truth is that's where we are. And so it's time to be dire about it. And, you know, while the bigger emitters and like we should push our governments and our corporations to lower their carbon footprint, we also, I think it's a both and situation. We also should each be doing whatever we can. And when there's opportunities like this, you know, especially where it's going to be negligible for low income folks, and then for people who have a little bit more money or have a little bit more time, right? I think of time and money very similarly, right? You were talking about the time it takes to navigate the tax system, the rebates, all of that. That's time. And if you're working 80 hours a week, you don't have that time. But say that you can work kind of a lower amount and have enough money, you have that time. That's a really high yield place to put your time. So I'd just say to listeners, like, if you're thinking about things you can do, like there's of course your everyday habits, but ultimately stuff like taking advantage of the IRA, taking advantage of this money and making these big changes, that's, you do that one time and then you set it and forget it kind of thing, which is of course what we're about here too in some ways. So
the other thing that I think, you know, it's always so jarring to like read about how much money we're investing in this stuff. You know, we're talking about trillions of dollars, and like that sounds like a lot of money. And it does feel like there's pushback around like, well, we're all like, as a country, we're already in debt. Like, you know, we don't have that money to spend. But I do want to remind folks that like we aren't being charged the like full cost of using fossil fuels. You know, like if
that's subsidized.
Yeah, if things were equitable, it would be much more expensive to heat your home, fill your car with gas, all those sorts of things. And we've kind of reached the point where like it's either spend the money or like watch the decline of human civilization. And
or not have a future for our children and the generations below us. You know, I don't have children myself, but I've had my first niece now, and so I'm like, oh man, I would really like her to have a habitable planet. That would be great.
Yeah. I'm still planning to live for, you know, decades.
A minute, at least a little bit here. Yeah, I'm gonna stick around a while. No, absolutely. I think it is dire. And I think from the money perspective, I think when you look at the overall, you know, I don't have the stats in front of me, but the overall US budget, like we're putting a lot of money, a lot of places. And I understand that's part of your conversation with our guest today, but there is a conversation to be had about where we put our money. and we put a lot of money other places, and to have foreign bases on other countries and to do a lot of military things. I mean, that's the biggest part of our budget. So from my personal perspective is like, well, if my taxes are going to go to that, I would like them also to go to me for this, you know?
Yeah, I think that's, you know, I mean, talking about taxes is probably outside the realms of this podcast, but like just the idea that the United States, you know, historically has had low taxes compared to other countries.
Yes, that's true.
But other countries get a lot more personal benefit out of the taxes they pay than folks in the United States tend to.
Yeah, their taxes go into social programs that everybody can use, and we have fewer of those in comparison, for sure. So when stuff like this comes along, where this money can go right back into our homes and save us money and save the planet, that's really cool. We should really take advantage of that.
And so you mentioned we've got a guest this week. His name is Aaron Viles. He's the campaign director at the Electrification Coalition. They're a not-for-profit that advocates for electric vehicles on a mass scale with a focus on minimizing America's dependence on foreign oil and oil in general. And you know, we've talked a lot about EVs and like they're fun to drive. You know, you can get money or rebates to make them affordable. They're good for the environment. But, you know, I hadn't really done a lot of thinking about the fact that depending on foreign countries for oil that we need to use in the United States, like that's a national security risk. It makes our economy sort of dependent on the whims of these, you know, petrol states, you know, thinking specifically about the war in Ukraine and Russia as the aggressor. And they're also a huge exporter of oil. Like how interconnected our economies are purely because of oil is like kind of nuts.
No, that's what was coming to mind when you started talking about that for me too, is Russia and Ukraine, and just thinking about how when we are dependent on foreign countries in that way, it makes it more difficult for us to respond to humanitarian crises. And we're seeing that across the globe right now. And I think that's also outside of the scope of the podcast to get deeply into, but I think it's not controversial to say there are certain countries who are not getting involved because they need that oil. And that's just they need to run their country on that. And so, you know, having a little more self-sufficiency can only help us engage on a global scale in a more ethical, humanitarian-based way is sort of my thinking.
Well, and then also, you know, the idea that we're creating jobs for folks in the United States and we're like sourcing our electrons domestically, which is something awesome. Aaron talked about, was really interesting. So we'll hear from Aaron Viles next, and then I'll come back and talk to you, Kelsey.
Great. Can't wait to hear it.
Our guest today is Aaron Viles. He's the director of campaigns at Electrification Coalition. This nonpartisan, not-for-profit is focused on the deployment of electric vehicles on a mass scale to combat the economic, public health, and national security dangers caused by America's dependence on oil. Aaron, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Andrew.
So let's get right into it. America's dependence on oil. That's an interesting take on the electrification push. Can you talk about what that means?
Absolutely. So what we know, and I think as we're experiencing firsthand right now with the global fight against Russia because of their invasion of Ukraine, it's very clear that petrostates have an outsized ability to influence the global course of events. And that leaves the United States really at a deficit while we are absolutely kind of continue to be a leader of the globe. Those petrostates are able to influence things that we just can't influence. So whether it's Saudi Arabia or whether it's Russia, they have the ability to influence the price of oil, which really has a huge impact on our global economy. So a lot of folks will say, well, we could just drill here in the United States and get all the oil we need. While we can drill a lot of oil in the United States, we cannot drill cheap oil. So the price of oil is something that's kind of above our ability to influence, whereas folks like Saudi Arabia and Russia absolutely can. So what we do to compensate is police the world's oil supply lines with our military. We spend about $80 billion a year just for that task alone from the Department of Defense appropriations. So, it's a lot of money. It leaves us vulnerable. And there's a much better alternative, which is to extricate ourselves and kind of step out of the global demand for oil through technological advances. Obviously, the single biggest use of oil is for kind of gas and diesel. Our transportation sector is absolutely wedded to petroleum. And so if we move to domestically produced electrons as a source of our transportation fuel, we are going to absolutely decrease our reliance on those global oil markets and put that money into our own pockets, right?
Sure.
By increasing the amount of energy that's used for transportation, that money stays in communities very, very close to home, and creates good American jobs, while also seeing huge environmental benefits. Cutting the emissions from our transportation sector in half, and also just saving folks a heck of a lot of money, which I think is the kind of most undersold element of electrification. People talk a lot about the kind of climate impacts of EVs, but actually saving consumers money is a really smart way to reason to embrace this technology as well.
So that's an interesting point. Because we're sort of in the transition point, a lot of people are thinking about spending their money on electric vehicles, electrification. I actually recently purchased an electric car, and part of we're pretty good budgeters, and we hadn't had a car payment for a long time, but we had started saving for an electric car, kind of like getting used to that car payment again. And one of the things, we were also budgeting for gas and oil changes and other maintenance that you get with a 15-year-old car. And it didn't really strike me until we were budgeting, moving to an electric vehicle means no gas budget, much smaller, fuel budget if you think about charging, no oil changes. The maintenance on an electric car, even like brakes last longer, tires are a thing that probably go quicker, but the economics of an electric car, beyond the purchase price, are really interesting.
Yeah, we call it, total cost of ownership. So if you look at the total cost of ownership of your vehicle and you look at comparable vehicles, right, then, EVs are always the winner.
Yeah.
As long as your mileage makes sense, right? Because I think the biggest savings is that you're paying about a third of as much for your fuel. Fuel's a weird word to use there because it's electricity, which clearly is not your typical thought of fuel. But yeah, so you're spending about 5 cents a mile to charge your EV compared to about 14 cents a mile to put gas in your car. So about a third there. And that's, for kind of a smaller vehicle. Of course, if you get a bigger vehicle, you're going to spend more. And Americans tend to really like our big vehicles. So, that's certainly something to consider. But, the further you drive that vehicle, actually, the more you're saving. But as you noted, there's an upfront cost right now, differential, and there's a delta between an EV and a traditional internal combustion engine vehicle, typically. Although if you look at some of these smaller vehicles like a Leaf or a Chevy Bolt, these things aren't they've made them quite affordable. But then if you look at something like a lot of bells and whistles on your Tesla, or if you've got a Rivian, these are very expensive vehicles because they are competing for a luxury market. And if you think about how these companies have come into the space, they've thought that's the right approach, to get the kind of high-end consumers first, those influencers, get them to bite on the exciting new technology, and also help them make more money as a company as they move into the space, which obviously Tesla has figured that out pretty well. I think Rivian is very much kind of following that model. Lucid also, these EV only manufacturers, starting at the high end, and then expanding theoretically to offer more models that are more affordable. But that's, I think, a really interesting element. We are seeing a massive shift in light duty vehicles from internal combustion engines to EVs. We're seeing consumers are responding. So the sales of EVs, folks like yourself, Andrew, we're seeing a very significant increase. EV share of new car sales in 2022 hit 5.8%. Up from 3.2% in 2021. And the first quarter of 2023, the EV share is about 7%. So, still small, but, you can see the curve.
Yeah.
And what I think is really going to be driving that is just model availability. So more and more automakers are committing to EVs. They know that's their future. And so they're kind of, following that Tesla model, offering you the Hummer, which I don't know what human's going to buy that, but apparently GM's pretty sure they're out there and they're going to
Yeah.
spend a lot of money on it. Or, you know, Ford's model, which I think is a little bit more, you know, kind of makes sense to the average consumer. Things like the truck, the F-150 Lightning, their most, you know, their highest sale vehicle. They're now offering an EV version of it. The, you know, Mach-E, so kind of a cool sporty wagon that's got the Mustang branding, although some purists have problems with that. But a very cool, you know, sport SUV basically, which are just a little bit more, I think, accessible in terms of cost, right? But you know, more and more of those options are rolling out, so you don't have to be somebody who embraces the, I don't know, future forward lines of a Leaf or a Bolt, or, you know, you don't need to want to drive a Buck Rogers car. You just want to drive a car that gets you from point A to point B as cheaply as possible, as easily as possible. More and more EVs are meeting that need for consumers, and that's, I think, what's going to drive a lot of the adoption. And so that's exciting for, I think, for folks like us who've advocated for the increase in the technology for quite a long time and the value it provides to our society and individual consumers. But, you know, I think it really is a matter of the writing's on the wall. The auto companies are absolutely, you know, kind of pinning their future to these vehicles. You're seeing it with subsequent, you know, investments, domestic investments in the manufacturing space, you know, battery plants popping up everywhere. I'm in Kentucky. Ford is, you know, is broken ground on the largest thing I've ever seen in my life. this plant that is just outside of Louisville that's going to be building the majority of, you know, the batteries for Ford, although they have other battery plants underway as well. So big, huge investments, which means real American jobs, and it means that we're able to kind of compete with some of the international folks who, again, you don't want to, from our national security perspective, right? We're not really very excited about the idea of going from the Saudi Arabia, you know, frying pan into the Beijing fire, right? So I think the fact that China has a kind of head start on the U.S. in EV technology and battery technology and processing means we're going to need to take some serious and, I think, focused action to address that. And thankfully, I think the Biden administration and through some bipartisan efforts in Congress actually have met the moment in a very real way, incentivizing that domestic production through some pretty big bills that, you know, that we're seeing now the influence of, the, you know, the IRA and the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Chips and Science Act. These three big bills that really are prioritizing U.S. manufacturing and deployment of EVs in the entire, you know, supply chain from minerals to markets.
So let's talk about sort of, you know, the like non-consumer side of EVs, you know, the idea of like fleets, semis, that sort of like transportation infrastructure. What are you seeing going on there?
Well, it's a very exciting space there as well, and I think a lot of fleets are really embracing that value of the EVs that we just discussed, right? So you've got companies like Amazon who are making very big commitments and investments in electrifying their fleet, which, of course, you know, from 0 to 100 in a very short amount of time. Like, we've seen Amazon trucks overwhelming our neighborhoods, right? Like, it wasn't that long ago that wasn't a thing, and now they're everywhere. So the fact that they're electrifying them at a very fast pace is great for our communities, great for public health, great for the drivers. I've spoken with the drivers of some of these Rivian delivery vans, and they're really excited about how the AC works to keep them comfortable in their job, how the battery range is meeting their needs, and very, very great for kind of our environment, great for our energy security again. But I think really ultimately great for Amazon's bottom line, which is one of the reasons they're doing it, right? So that I think is a very exciting example. And what I love about the Amazon, they've got, I think, 10,000 vehicles already deployed, plans for at least 100,000 in a very short amount of time. They helped kind of create the company Rivian through that, both their investment in the company itself, but then the order they place for these delivery vans. And I just love that they're so visually noticeable, right? From a Rivian Amazon to their Dodge, whatever, Power Wagon. It's very clear difference, right? In terms of one to the other. So it captures your eye. You're like, what the heck is that thing? And then, you'll realize pretty quickly that there's no exhaust pipe. And it is, because sometimes I get annoyed by the Amazon van idling in my neighborhood for a very long time.
Yeah.
I can no longer be annoyed by that because, these are not putting out any emissions whatsoever. And Amazon's just, I think, one of the most, clear and visible fleets that are making the transition. I think you're seeing Pepsi, who taken ownership of the Tesla Semi.
Mm-hmm.
They're right now doing some real-time testing of those Tesla semis, and they're putting in like 800 miles in a 24-hour period. So it's not just the short haul last mile delivery that can electrify. We now have the technology to do the long haul kind of class 8 semi, and it's not just Tesla. The Freightliner has EVs as well. Volvo has some very cool EVs for their heavy duty applications. And if we think back to that idea of who saves money with EVs, it's the folks who do the long drives that save the most. So I think there's a real incentive to figure out the kind of the long haul semis. Of course, that means we're going to need the investment of the infrastructure. That's certainly a challenge. But what we know is that there are a lot of different forces at work to help that challenge, help meet that challenge. So there's some federal rules that are coming into place. There's state level laws. So there's about 8 states that have adopted a rule called the Advanced Clean Truck Rule that's really going to, kind of force some electrification in these medium and heavy duty spaces. And then that gives the regulators of the electric grid the ability to kind of approve investments on the transmission side to make sure those depots that will require a lot of energy, make sure they've got the investments to meet that need. We aren't going to see a ton of need for generation. In terms of U.S. energy generation, we've actually decreased. There has not been growth over the past couple of years, largely COVID driven, I think, but efficiency driven as well. But, as we move into more medium and heavy duty electrification, we probably will see about a 1% increase in demand. But I think 1% is historically pretty small and something that, we should be able to manage as America, especially the amount of solar and wind that are coming online. It should be clean additional generation, because if you think about EVs and the way they function, it's charging a battery. You can charge a battery in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different duty cycles. There's a lot of flexibility to help actually support our grid, as opposed to just putting more demands on the grid. As an EV owner, you'll probably come into contact with a time of use policy, right? Yep. So when you charge your EV, you can get a lot better deal from your local utility if they put these programs in place, which more and more utilities are doing that, so that when they've got capacity, you are able to, because if they don't sell it to you, they don't sell it. Right. They don't have batteries on our grid just yet. So there's a great incentive for you to come online, later at night to charge your EV, and they're going to pass that savings on to you in a real way. So, and that'll apply to all of our fleets, right? They're going to negotiate their deals with their utilities. And another piece of this that is really exciting in the heavy duty space, and one that our country is making a very significant commitment in is electric school buses. And these things are enormous rolling batteries, and they can be such a grid asset to your utility if they embrace the opportunity. But the EPA is absolutely investing in the electrification of our school bus fleet. So one of the most iconic fleets out there. And I think this is like the gateway drug to electrification, because there's no one that doesn't, want their kid to get a cleaner ride to school. Right. And the tests are, the research is very clear that putting these kids on these diesel buses is affecting their health. It's affecting their ability to learn. And, it doesn't take a genius to figure that out. If you think about these little kids, where their heads are versus the very tall vehicle, where the exhaust pipe is, of course it makes sense that idling school buses aren't great for anyone, but certainly those kids who just breathe more per pound. It has a real public health impact of making that transition, and then also talking to folks who drive these things. So it's always a challenge to hire school bus drivers. They really like the ESPs. Oh my gosh, it's quiet. It's not polluting. You can actually yell at the kids. They're going to hear you. And manage the children. And then, so it's a win-win-win really. Cause it's helping the investments, helping the school district save money. Again, getting back to saving money. if they're making an investment in the kind of the initial technology, the charging infrastructure, there are a lot of programs to support the charging infrastructure purchase as well, and you've got this asset that is just cutting your fuel bill, in half or more. And saving maintenance costs. So school districts who are early adopters are really excited about the prospects and are able to, utilize that asset in a lot of different ways, from a rolling classroom to, a rolling, revenue generator, because you can actually sell back to the grid in certain areas who have like bidirectional charging. They can actually buy energy back from the school buses at certain points. We've seen some models that have done that. Mostly, I think in Massachusetts, they had a pilot that did it, but the district, made about $20,000 a summer just by having a couple of moments when the school bus was going to be idle, where they put it, back into the grid when the grid really needed a little bit of support. And that's again, a really great benefit for school districts that, otherwise an idle school bus is nothing but, a diminished asset. But this is something that can help generate revenue. And obviously we know education, always is underfunded, woefully underfunded, and anything they can do to help cut their operating costs and their ongoing costs is a win for us.
So the vehicle to grid idea, I think is really interesting. Right now we're still in sort of like this early adopter phase of like there's a lot of solar going on in places where like it makes economic sense. But like when it's nighttime, there's the duck curve, and generating electricity gets really expensive again. But the idea that like each home could have a battery parked in its driveway that, supplements their usage is really interesting. But thinking about that on like a larger scale, like school buses are one, semi, fleet vehicles. What's the holdup? Like, why aren't we just all doing this now?
Well, I don't know if you've dug deeply into your local investor-owned utility, but they are not necessarily the paragons of early adoption and entrepreneurial engagement with their assets. So I do think, as much as I think are excited about electrification, and they're excited because they're going to sell more electricity, right? Yeah. But they're also dealing with some very old infrastructure. So some very real challenge. I don't think we can just say across the board, yes, everyone, let's go to vehicle to grid, right? Because as you've seen, there's more of a benefit for them in the vehicle to grid conversation than things like solar. But rooftop solar has demonstrated that utilities aren't our friend always, right. in terms of your energy independence as a consumer. So I think there's a lot of challenges. There needs to be, I think, some regulatory certainty that gives them the ability to kind of meet the moment. They are regulated typically by a PUC or a PSC, Public Service Commission, Public Utilities Commission, which are then kind of guided either by the governor and their appointees or the legislators. So it's kind of a long process to get exciting pilots up and running. So yeah, I think as I mentioned, some of it's happening. And some utilities are further along than, there's certainly some that are early adopters and are excited about the prospect. California is, I think, driving a lot of this because of just what they're doing with their grid. And, they're absolutely pushing the envelope in terms of how you manage energy and how you create programs to support clean energy. But, I think also, National Grid is another example, and they're in like upstate New York and Massachusetts, and they're doing some really exciting stuff. But it's going to take a minute. My big concern is that we are in a unique moment. We are in an EV moment, Andrew, that we have never seen before. We are in a transition period that is since the horse and buggy to the Model T, we have not seen its like. Right. I think the user experience for most people, it's going to be more like going from a flip phone to a smartphone. Right. You don't have to, it's not like you're shoveling, anything. Right. But you're absolutely, the user experience is way better for the EV technology. You don't have to go to gas stations anymore. You mostly just charge at home. Right. And save yourself some money. But I think as that transition is happening, we thankfully have a partner at the federal level right now that is embracing this EV moment and is prioritizing the U.S. making a leapfrog to get ahead in this transportation revolution. And that's exciting. And they've put a lot of money into the space, and that's also exciting. But we shouldn't bank on an IRA every few years, right?
Right.
So this is a one-time shot for a while, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I really want to make sure that whether it's the bipartisan infrastructure law or the IRA, we're future-proofing our investments as much as we can. And I think that's a challenge, right? But if we think about the school bus money as well, like we got, billions of dollars over 5 years to invest this. I want to make sure that each and every vehicle that rolls out is going to be bidirectional, that's going to be meeting that opportunity. And so that most of the charging infrastructure allows for that capability. You don't have to have it for every plug, that's for sure, but for some, certainly. And it's got to be tied into the grid and into the buildings in a way that you can, utilize it, right? And that's, I think really important for folks who are paying attention to advocate for this. It's a little more expensive in the short run, but gives you so much more flexibility in the long run that I think it's absolutely worth doing at scale right now. Even if, as you point out, utilities are not really making these programs available to everybody, not yet, but ultimately it's where things are headed. That kind of microgrid type management, the kind of distributed assets, that's all really important for the future of our, kind of electric grid, whether the utilities are like ready to do it or not. At some point, that's what they'll be doing.
So, we mentioned, federal funding regulation, statewide, there's, utility programs. How are you as an organization interfacing, with this? Like, because there is the Inflation Reduction Act, right? But like it's implemented on the state level. States have like different ideas of how they want to implement it. Some are early adopters and have things in place already. How is that all shaken out for you?
Yeah, it is a lot to manage. Thankfully, we have a great team who are helping to do that work. But yeah, it's quite a moment, and it takes state level engagement, it takes federal level engagement. I was in DC last week to have lots of conversations with the White House CEQ, Council on Environmental Quality, and other agencies who are kind of in the thick of this work, both from a regulatory side and from a kind of resource deployment side. So we've got a whole team that we stood up that is kind of watchdogging the resources and helping states and local municipalities meet these moments. One thing we're really concerned about is just the drag on, cities don't have a ton of staff who can, respond to every federal or state opportunity that's flowing from these dollars, right? So if you put too many programs in place that are too unique and special, and it requires just these kind of boutique type applications, you're just going to burn out, because not everyone's going to get every application, right? So, but what I'm seeing is a lot of our partners in the NGO community are also very aware of this. The funders are helping support entities that can do the hand holding and make sure that cities get kind of their fair share of these resources. And, because we all deserve cleaner air, we all deserve, the kind of climate programs that have both the kind of big picture impact, right, of reducing global greenhouse gases, but also a very real local public health impact as well by, there's a correlation there between greenhouse gases and air pollution at a very real level. So, and you'd hate to see communities left behind. And I think whether it's the kind of Justice 40 initiative or just how they're prioritizing these programs, like the Clean School Bus program, gives additional points to rural communities. So it's not folks left behind on that front. So, it's not going to be perfect. There's lots of road bumps, kind of bumps along the road and kind of hiccups in these programs. But there's, I think, a very real kind of intentionality to kind of learn as we go and to make sure that, everyone's kind of, the rising tide lifts all boats here.
So, as a, individual American homeowner, renter, how should we be thinking about these programs, or what should we be doing to help them along or take advantage of them?
Yeah, so a couple things. You should be aware of them and take advantage of them, right? So if you are thinking about getting a car, you should make sure you know about the federal tax credits that are available. And, there's a great analysis that came out recently that just shows the most affordable way to buy a car right now is to lease an EV, because the lease mechanism ensures that all of the federal taxes that are available to you are captured, and again, that kind of total cost of ownership means you're going to save a lot of money at the pump. So that's one thing. But and I'm exclusively focused on transportation, but those programs are in lots of different kind of energy consumption areas, heat pumps, et cetera. So I think there's that element. And we've got a great tool on our website. We have an EV funding finder. So if you are, if you manage a fleet, you can, get the information you need to make those purchases, eyes wide open, save yourself money. If you're a school district, you can find out what's available to you. If you're a municipality, or if you're just a private owner who wants to buy a vehicle. So that's on our website. You can check that out, electrificationcoalition.org. And then the other piece I think for consumers to be aware of is that your voice matters, right? So this historic investment, the IRA, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, Chips and Science Act, that only happened because we had leaders who wanted to make it happen. The IRA represents the single largest climate bill, period. Not just in the U.S., right, but anywhere. I don't know that most people know that. And so if you're someone who is motivated by energy savings, smart energy, climate change action, you should be excited about that piece of legislation, even though it sounds weird and dumb. What? I didn't see my inflation didn't get reduced. What? Yeah. And so, I think there's a need to kind of acknowledge where we are and how we got here. And I don't know that everyone's doing that. And if your representative, look it up. If your representative didn't vote for it, ask them why they didn't. And don't believe them when they said it was because they wanted to save you money. Because they just got off a spending spree under the Trump administration that was historic and didn't help us. So I don't want to get too political here, but unfortunately, that's where we get change, is through our political system. So as much as it's kind of a little nasty and you don't really like to pay very much attention to it because it doesn't necessarily, play to our better angels, our political process is how we as a society make investments in our future. And so when they do something right, I think we need to, make sure we acknowledge it and take advantage of it.
And I think too, especially when you think about the public health concerns, that's very much a local thing, and encouraging folks to engage in their local government and advocate for clean energy, I think is also a big part of that engagement.
Absolutely. That's so true. And I think it's really important that, the benefits, again, we meet the moment because of an energy security, mandate. That's what our mission is. But man, there's a lot of co-equal benefits to this technology, and it's an exciting time to see that shift. And I get a little disappointed when I see folks try to make it more political than it should be. Sure. I don't think we saw organizing to support folks who didn't want to give up their flip phones and tell people why your smartphone was, evil. Right. So, and I think that there's some of that that's happening right now that it's very disingenuous, and it's, not helping us out as consumers. Ford and GM are not making these investments, because of climate change. I'm just be super honest. This is where the technology is going. They are taking advantage of it. They are looking to, get a competitive advantage over their rivals, and make as much money as possible. That's what they do as corporations. So that kind of EV shift is underway for a reason. It's that technological advance that we know is real and will probably, pay a lot of dividends as long as we are smart about how we adopt it and move forward with it.
Great. Well, Aaron, I want to thank you so much for chatting with me today. If folks want to learn more about your work, what should they do?
Yeah, they can just check out electrificationcoalition.org. We've got a lot of great ways to get involved. We've got, state level action. We've got 10 states where we're very active in the state legislature, and we've got, opportunities to support smart investments in EVs and smart regulations to ensure the EV kind of market is developing, and then federally as well. So, there's right now a big push around how the EPA is adopting some of these rules to ensure that heavy duty vehicles are moving to zero emission vehicles. And it's an exciting time for sure.
Each week, we take some time to answer questions from listeners. This week, we hear from Katie, who wants to know how to keep track of indoor and outdoor air quality, especially as her kids go back to school. So this is a great question. I think especially this last summer, it's no longer summer, right? We're in October now, but the Canadian wildfires had sort of like an outsized impact, especially on the Midwest. Historically, the West Coast has a lot of like wildfire smoke, and so I think air quality is kind of on folks' minds a little bit more than maybe it used to be.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think normally we think of the West Coast having fire season,
Yes.
like that's what it is. But this year, you and I had fire season a little bit. It was
Mm-hmm.
here in the Midwest. Yeah.
So, outdoor air quality is one thing, indoor air quality is another. I think indoor air quality is it almost feels like the next frontier of like home health in some ways. Um, new houses we're building are getting sort of like more airtight because that's more efficient from like a heating and cooling standpoint. But that also means there's sort of less in like outdoor air, like filtering in and clearing. And so I would definitely recommend to Katie to get some sort of indoor air quality monitor. Um, you're probably going to spend a couple $100s on it, but you're going to be able to understand your indoor air quality a lot better. I recommend the Aware Element. It's about $200. It's sort of like the right level of accurate, and really like it's not like a super scientific measurement, although it is very scientific. But really, what you want to kind of look at is sort of like your trends over time. It'll like track VOCs and I think radon, sort of all of like the very dangerous things. Um, It'll also, I believe, track carbon dioxide. So
Oh,
one of the interesting things that I've learned about air quality is that if you have like a lot of people in a room together and it's relatively sealed, that room's going to fill up with carbon dioxide, and that sort of
right.
like it makes folks sleepy. It makes them like not pay attention as well, and it's like sort of that thing where if like you're at a like conference in a hotel or something,
No, that's
um,
spacious and airy, but at your
yeah,
house,
yeah, like yeah, so pay attention to your CO2 levels, but ultimately for your indoor air quality, figure out where you are and then, take some steps to make it better. And that might be, if that CO2 level is building up, open a window or turn on an exhaust fan. If you're building a new home, think about installing, an HRV or an ERV, which are ways to circulate fresh air into your home without um, pushing the conditioned air that you've paid to condition outside of your home. But outdoor air quality is a whole other thing. And Kelsey, I think you've got some
yeah, I
advice there.
can. Yeah, I can speak to that, but I appreciate the information on the indoor quality. It's a lot to think about. It does make me think about like cocktail parties I've been at where we all get a little sleepy, even
Yeah,
sans alcohol. It's like
yeah.
that's very interesting. So it makes me want to buy one of those things. Say the brand name of it again that you like.
Aware,
Aware.
AWAIR,
Okay, maybe
element.
we'll
Yeah,
link to that in the show
yeah,
notes because that seems like a really good recommendation. It's just like anything, you can't change what's going on if you don't have a benchmark for what's going on. So
yeah.
the first step is what's the situation, right? Yeah, so outdoor air quality is a little bit different. So the way that we measure it is the AQI, which is the air quality index. So those are usually associated with colors. So lots of times on smartphones, like if you look at the weather, it's going to tell you the AQI in your area. So like yellow is a little bit dangerous. It's between 51 and 100. Orange is unhealthy for sensitive groups. So maybe you have a lung condition or another uh, like immunocompromised state, something like that, or you're elderly or you're a child, right? So we think of, and sensitive groups is actually a pretty broad group. I think it's really worth mentioning that sensitive groups is actually a lot of adults.
Mm-hmm.
So you might want to ask you like, am I a sensitive? Am I a part of that? Red is unhealthy for everyone. And then purple is spooky, spooky, stay inside. So to that end, a lot of what you're going to see on like normal weather apps is unfortunately not always that accurate. So it's an okay place to start. But if you're really trying to take it seriously, or you are part of that sensitive population, you have kids or whatever, I would focus on this other company, this other group called Purple Air. So purpleair.com. And they're specifically referring to that purple air, the really unhealthy thing. And they're cool because you can buy sensors from them. So their data is coming from individual homes. Whereas the aggregated data, one of the things about weather is like, weather and air in general is our sensors. We don't have as many as we really should to have a more accurate understanding. And so this group gets sensors into regular people's homes. And you can buy some for inside, you can buy some for outside. So when I look at Chicago, I can literally see I've got 10 or 20 neighbors who have these sensors. So I can know exactly what's going on like my 5-block radius. Like, how bad is it? Which is really, really unique. And I trust that data a lot more than what you're going to get. So, glance at your phone, whatever, like that's still going to give you some information. And obviously if it's purple or what are the colors, or red or orange, like I would recommend staying inside. I would particularly recommend not exercising outside, right? As like, that's the real thing, is like, don't go for a jog in purple air. You're going to feel that. It's going to feel bad. And of course the pollution that comes from a lot of different sources, and you can even see it neighborhood by neighborhood. This is kind of where the environmental issues come in, where like certain neighborhoods have certain plants in cities that are really bad for air quality. And if the neighborhood didn't realize or wasn't able to push back against that, that's, a pretty big problem in cities. But anyway, wherever you live, that's how you should know. Look at the AQI, and that will tell you, is it safe to be outside today? Is it safe to play outside today? Or should I stay inside with an air purifier or something like that?
Yeah. So you definitely want to sort of understand your air. There are devices you can buy to make it more accurate than what's on your phone. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today for this episode of Smart Energy. Special thanks to Kelsey for joining me and our guest Aaron Viles for the fascinating conversation about electric vehicles. And of course, all of you for listening. To see the show notes, send feedback, and learn more about Smart Energy, visit ohmconnect.com/smartenergy. Stay safe, conserve some energy, and we'll see you next time.